This is the Law 401 podcast, legal issues decoded for you, brought to you by Roger Williams University School of Law.
Hello and welcome back to Law 401, Legal Issues Decoded, a new podcast at Roger Williams University School of Law, where we break down the legal issues making headlines in Rhode Island and beyond.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm one of your hosts. I am a librarian. I live in Rhode Island. I'm a lawyer, I'm a law professor, and I am the Assistant Dean for Curricular Innovation at Roger Williams Law School. And I'm happy to be here with my co-host.
Hi, I'm Michael Donnelly-Boylen. I am not a lawyer. I am a political nerd, and I'm not from Rhode Island. But
we like him anyway.
To talk about legal issues with you here in the state. We're here to cut through the legalese and have a real conversation about the laws and the policies that impact your everyday life, whether you're a lifelong Rhode Islander or just trying to make sense of the headlines.
We meet with journalists and legal experts and community voices and advocates to help us unpack the legal side of the most talked about issues in our state. So in this episode, we're digging into Rhode Island's housing crisis. What's really going on? Who is impacted? And why has this issue been everywhere in the headlines? To start with, what do we even mean when we say affordable housing? Well, there's a definition. Affordable housing is housing that costs no more than 30% of your income. But in Rhode Island, more than 143,000 households are spending more than that 30% of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. That's not just a policy issue. It's a safety issue, it's a security issue, and it's a justice issue. What are some of the reasons this might be happening? Well, land in Rhode Island is prohibitively expensive. Our housing stock is some of the oldest, and the gap between what people earn and what it costs to live here keeps growing. This isn't just about numbers. It's about neighbors. It's about fairness and whether people, regardless of age, income, race, or background, can actually afford to live in the communities they call home. To make sense of it all, we're joined by two experts who understand this issue certainly more than we do. First is Brenda Clement from HousingWorks Rhode Island and RWU Law's own Professor Suzy Harrington-Steppen.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little about your background just as we get started?
Sure, happy to. I'm Brenda Clement, and I'm Executive Director of HousingWorks Rhode Island. We're a community partner at Roger Williams University. We're housed at the Providence campus, and we're a research and policy organization that looks at all things housing, and more importantly, its connectedness between economic growth and development in the state and improving health and educational outcomes.
And I'm Suzy Harrington-Steppen, a Rhode Islander, and I'm the Associate Director of Pro Bono Programs, and I get the joy of connecting what our students learn in the classroom with the community need, and we have a huge focus on housing with eviction defense work, as well as a number of other community pro bono projects in immigration, guardianship. We work at the ACI, so lots of different ways that we're serving the community, and I'm excited to talk today.
So I think that means you'll come back when we talk about a bunch of other things.
Yes, please.
All right, so we're just going to start broad with a question for Brenda. Can you give us an overview of current housing affordability landscape in Rhode Island?
How long do we have? Well, you've highlighted some of the points already that, Rhode Island has a long time housing problem and crisis. We produce an annual housing fact book, as you know, that looks at data. This is our 20th anniversary, or last year was our 20th anniversary and 20th book. And I'm sad to say that cost burden number and that third of Rhode Islanders hasn't budged much within that time period. We have simply not been producing enough housing units, particularly for lower wage workers and lower wage individuals for a long time. In fact, our peak building period in Rhode Island was in the mid-1980s. So that was a long time ago. And there's lots of reasons that we haven't been building, and I'll stop now, but happy to talk about those as we go through.
Can I just ask a follow-up? It feels like it's an issue that's happening now. I feel like whenever I hear things happening at the legislature, and I know Projo did a series on it and other media outlets have, what makes this an issue, like a crisis right now?
Well, I think in part because because we've been underproducing for so long, this is no longer just a lower income problem. This is much more of a moderate income issue. Even in fact, in our fact book for the last several years, even if you're earning $100,000 a year, you can't affordably buy anywhere in Rhode Island's 39 cities and towns. Both inventory levels for homeownership and for rental have been at a long time and low for a long time now, for about 5 years. And that means that we see, people who are much more higher income also impacted. Sadly, that's what gets attention right at the State House when more people are impacted, but you get more attention on this issue. I also think it's because of people like me and other fellow housing advocates who have been banging the drums and screaming loud for a long time about this was an issue that we need to pay attention to.
We appreciate your advocacy. Give us some hope. What's on the horizon out there right now for affordable housing programs and projects?
So, there is some good news. We have had, because of the focus that we've had on legislation for the last several years, we've done a lot of focus on real technical issues around land use and zoning. That funding for housing comes largely in Rhode Island from the federal level. In fact, almost 75% of our funding comes from federal resources, which is why we're a little concerned with the things going on in Washington these days. And what you build, where you build, and how you build, though, are all controlled at the local level. And so zoning and land use and where we're allowed to grow and develop as a state are critical in order for us to make those numbers grow, right, and to make those housing units grow. In fact, in a lot of what we find in the zoning atlas is that a lot of what we like about Rhode Island, a Patuxent Village, a Garden City, Wickedon, even a denser neighborhood that we're in right now, cannot be replicated easily under existing zoning ordinances. So looking at ways to change that and looking at ways to get people to understand that what we're talking about is not real change, but just continuing to rebuild their communities and what they look like is what we're trying to do with all of that legislation.
Changing hearts and minds is difficult.
It is difficult, and we realize that for most people, owning your home is the most valuable asset that you have, and so anything that you perceive as a threat to that is something that you're going to be concerned about. But I am sad to say that NIMBYism and bananas and cave people are all alive and well and regularly go to zoning board meetings.
I feel like we're sensing a theme in the first few episodes, which is we are having conversations about local legal issues. And in every conversation we have, what is going on at the federal or national level is coming up. And here, even though we're very purposely having a conversation about Rhode Island, there is sort of the shadow of what's going on nationally that is impacting us. Like, whether we like it or not. And so I guess that's just something that I noticed over these episodes.
Absolutely, 100%.
I just want to change the, segue to the next thing so that Suzy can be more involved.
No, I love listening to Brenda. I learned so much from her. I'm like, please keep talking.
Me too.
It's the best.
Brenda, just to set this up a little bit, what is the relationship between affordable housing and eviction?
So obviously, affordability is a factor of income, right? Everybody needs affordable housing, regardless of your income level. Even if you're a millionaire, if there are only houses that are $1 billion, you have an affordability problem. But affordability, or the lack of it, particularly of rental stock, for people who are at 50% of median income or below, means that eviction numbers generally go up in a time of where we see little production and also low vacancy rates. So I will. Another fact from our fact book is that 92% of the fastest growing jobs in the state do not pay anywhere near a housing wage. And these are workers who are critical workers, who are home health aides, daycare workers, people working in our nursing homes and our assisted living facilities, retail jobs. All of these jobs that we know are critical for our economy are the people who struggle the most to keep the roof over their heads. So no surprise in a time of low production and low vacancy that we see eviction numbers grow, as sadly as we've seen, as Suzy will mention, I'm sure HousingWorks is the data partner on the Eviction Defense Project, and the numbers are back up to pre-COVID levels.
So Suzy, can you tell us more? What is the eviction help desk that the university and the law school have been putting out there, and who are our partners?
Yeah, so at least during the pandemic, we had this moment where we could see when folks got cash subsidies, ways to sort of make their rent work. It really kept people housed, but then we had a moratorium during COVID. The moratorium was lifted. And no surprise, the courts were inundated with eviction filings. The law school was in a great place to provide lots of students who are eager to assist and work directly with clients in the courthouse, which is where, when folks are faced with an eviction, they show up at court. There was nothing, there were no Zoom or Skype hearings. They were in person. Chief Judge LaFazia at the district court really welcomed the law school as well as Rhode Island Legal Services and the Rhode Island Center for Justice. These are two organizations that provide free legal services for folks in the state. The court said, come into the courthouse. Let's get you in the hallway. Not only will...
Sorry, are you saying that these people will come in, are being evicted and come in and don't have lawyers?
Yes. So in eviction cases, great question, Nicole. It's a really unusual area of law because 90% of plaintiffs have a lawyer. So landlords generally have lawyers, which makes sense for many landlords. It's a business proposition to own property, and 90% of tenants do not have lawyers.
That's shocking.
That is crazy.
It is shocking. And, anyone who cares about access to justice, it's hard not to be shocked. The system is set up for both people to have advocates. So when one side doesn't have an advocate, the system doesn't work it doesn't work for anyone. It's inefficient for judges. It's just the power dynamic is so off. So
sorry.
Yeah.
Just because this is for people who are out there who might not know as much about this as you do, I thought that people have the right to an attorney. Do they have a right to how come you're telling me they have a right to an attorney but they don't?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a right to counsel in criminal proceedings. There's not a right to counsel in civil proceedings. However, it's interesting, evictions are such serious matters. People losing their homes, it displaces entire families, communities. There's a movement to right to counsel, and that would mean that everyone who is being evicted would have an attorney. We don't have that yet in Rhode Island, but we're getting closer to that future. There are jurisdictions around the country that do have a right to counsel. In my mind, that's a no-brainer, just because, like I said, the rules are set up for both people to have advocates. When one person doesn't, it's like I often give the example. It's like, imagine playing Monopoly with someone who's like, all I do is Monopoly, and you've never seen the game, and they're like, let's get at it. You're gonna lose. There's just the advantages are too great.
It seems like trying to fight somebody with both of your arms tied behind your back.
And then some, I would say.
They have an attorney. They've come to court. They have an attorney, and you're just there who doesn't know things about court or law and trying to defend yourself
and it's really overwhelming. It's extremely stressful to go into any courthouse for whatever. If you're in a courthouse, you're dealing with a problem that needs to be resolved. And I think that's what's so hard about eviction. It is so stressful, and it is a trauma on the families, the individuals involved, and then to not have an advocate and to not even understand where to go in the courthouse, not to understand that maybe you have rights that you could be asserting, but you don't even understand how the rules, what the rules are. It's really challenging. And that's where our law students come in. Our law students play a pretty awesome role in the courthouse. They are generally the first person to speak with a tenant and to just be a welcome face that says, do you need help today? If so, we're here with legal services. We can provide some free advice before you go in that courtroom. And for many people, it's a world of difference. It means they're being listened to. I think people have an image of someone being evicted that's usually false.
Who is the typical person stopping at the desk?
There is no typical person. It is your neighbor. There are elderly folks. There are young people. There are moms with newborn babies. The number of children in the courthouse, I think, is shocking. If you haven't visited one of our local district courts, either Garrahy and Providence or Kent and Warwick, I would urge people listening, go to the local courthouses and see what's going on. There's a number of children on any given day. But people facing evictions are just like you and me. They've, sometimes the majority of them have fallen behind. Maybe they were ill. Maybe there was a brief issue with employment. For some folks, it means they just need to catch up. But when you don't know your rights and you're, having an eviction proceeding brought against you, sometimes people sort of quit before they've even been able to have a moment in court. So I would say there's no typical a tenant that we work with, but the majority of folks are behind on rent. And then the other folks that we work with are people who are having their tenancies terminated. So I'm sure lots of your listeners know this. Like right now in the state, if a landlord gives proper notice, they can ask you to leave for no reason. You could be a great tenant. I mean, I'm always, when I teach new students how to work on the help desk in court, the students are always so surprised that they'll talk to a tenant who's been in an apartment for 8-9 years. And they come in and they have money in their hand. They said, I've been paying, I don't understand. Their tenancy is just being terminated because they can. With proper notice, you do not need a reason to terminate someone's tenancy. And that's shocking for a lot of folks who've had stable housing and they don't want to leave.
That's crazy. Because that's your home. That's your home. That's crazy.
I thought this was staggering. So this is from the 2024 Housing Fact Book. During the 12-month period from July 2023 through June 2024, RILS, so Rhode Island
Legal Services,
and CFJ, the Center for Justice, provided legal counsel to 4,546 households facing eviction, including 10,653 people. 45% of the households included children under the age of 18, totaling 4,095. And nearly 3/4 of the contacts, and I'm guessing that means people who came to the desk asking for help, were initiated by women. That's a staggering number of people and children.
Professor Matt Desmond, who wrote the book Evicted, a great read if you haven't read it, talks about that we imprison poor men and we evict poor women. And the sadness of that statistic plays out in what you just read. I will say, though, that for housing advocates, to me, eviction court is almost too late, right? We want to and should be focusing more resources on preventing people from getting to eviction. If there's an issue about rent and paying for rent, if there's an issue about the quality of the housing, we should have warning systems and or resources in place earlier on in the process. You know, I don't want this to be a bad landlord, versus good tenant discussion, because there's a lot of times eviction decisions by landlords are much more complicated than that. And a lot of landlords are small landlords who are often struggling. And if the tenant doesn't pay their rent either, they're also not going to be able to pay their mortgage. So the problem is that there's just not enough units and not enough opportunity. If we had more rental units on the market, price would go down, right? And rent costs would go down, and maybe not enough for some tenants, but definitely more availability. So it's a complicated issue, and it's not a us them type of issue to solve.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I grew up in a 2-family house my parents owned, and we relied on that rent coming in from that house in order to pay the bills.
That's right.
If someone's not paying that rent, it affects the other family just as much.
That's right.
What support is out there for people who may be facing eviction or may have questions about their safety of their rental issue or issues with the landlord? Like, so there's the issues with the landlord, there's the safety of the rental, and there's just, hey, I'm facing an eviction or I'm behind and I just want to know what my rights are. Like, what's out there?
Yeah. Well, I just want to echo what Brenda said, which is like, we want to get upstream. This is not, having attorneys in the courthouse and even right to counsel is not really dealing with the issue. We've got to deal with more units and preventative. Like, how do we make sure people don't end up at the courthouse? There are good resources right now. There's the Landlord Tenant Handbook, which Brenda played a huge role in. That's access to laws and tenant rights in a really user-friendly way to access that. You can get that online. Rhode Island Legal Services, the Rhode Island Center for Justice, they all take intake over the phone. Ideally that's what tenants do, but the fact is resources are limited. So when an organization is getting, hundreds of calls each month, trying to keep up with that and then also keep up with the desperate need in the courthouse, it's really tough. We have South Coast Fair Housing, which is an organization that works in Rhode Island with housing discrimination issues, and our Human Rights Commission here in Rhode Island. I mean, there's so many different housing issues. We're talking about evictions, but also discrimination is real. People with children, people with service animals. I mean, the list goes on in terms of the insidious discrimination when people think they found a unit but somehow never seem to be able to land that unit. Brenda, you probably have other long lists of how folks folks can access resources.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that there were enough, but there are not, and people can turn to their local housing authority and other places to kind of access into the system. But our colleagues at the coalition say all the time, imagine if you called 911 and, that you had an emergency call and you needed an ambulance to come out, and you would expect that ambulance to be out within a few minutes. If you call the emergency numbers for housing groups or the coordinated entry system, the best we can say to you is, well, I'm sorry you have a problem today. I can put you on a wait list for centralized, even shelter beds are on a wait list at this point in time. And we can get back to you in a couple of weeks to help you fill out an application that will put you on a wait list for another 6 months to 5 years, depending on what type of unit you're looking for. I mean, I think we would all be outraged, right, if that was the answer you got if you called for an ambulance. But the reality is that that's the reality is that that's the reality that many people face every day, that they just do not have enough options and resources out there.
So a couple times, one of the resources that came up was the Rhode Island Center for Justice. Can you just tell our listeners what that is?
Yeah, so the Rhode Island Center for Justice is another legal services organization. So your listeners may have heard of like legal aid, places in your cities or in your states where you can get free legal services if you're income eligible. What's interesting about the Rhode Island Center for Justice is they don't receive any federal funding, so they're able to assist a larger population than our sort of traditional legal services office. Rhode Island Legal Services is an amazing legal services organization. They receive federal funding, and because of that, there's some limitations. The Center for Justice is able to really assist folks with a little bit higher incomes. It's still fairly low, 300% of the federal poverty level. And they're able to assist folks who are undocumented. So they are able to serve a portion of our community that wouldn't receive legal services without them. It's an incredible organization that has a partnership with the law school. We're really proud of that.
And you also talked about a coalition. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Which coalition I was talking about advocacy issues, or just
Rhode Island?
Rhode Island Coalition Against Homelessness. Yeah. So again, trying to address and provide resources to people when they're in a crisis and need emergency shelter and housing, and then trying to move them through the continuum so that they can be provided with more permanent housing. The problem is, for most of the time, we don't have those resources, and so they get stuck in places, or they get stuck in unsafe housing, or they double up or triple up in housing in order to be able to afford it.
How does substandard housing affect the residents?
Well, I mean, it has huge impacts on health and outcomes for students, not just lead, but asbestos, air quality issues. Other things are huge issues for many of the folks. We have, as you mentioned, have some of the oldest housing stock in the country. Particularly our rental housing stock is very old. And so a lot of that is not up to standards, right, and not up to current code and current building requirements as well, too. So we HousingWorks works with a number of projects with the Rhode Island Department of Health and the health equity zones, looking at the condition and quality of housing and looking at better code enforcement and ways to kind of improve the conditions of the housing to better provide a safer place. So not only do we need to address the quantity problem of housing, we also need to address the quality problem.
So I think some of our listeners are probably saying, well, this isn't me. I'm not that person who never needs eviction. I'm never going to be in substandard housing. How do these housing issues affect all Rhode Islanders?
Go ahead.
I mean, I think more and more I find that even our students, our law students, it does affect them. I mean, if you do, I just trained 20 students this morning who will be going into court tomorrow. When you do the math, it doesn't make sense. If you're saying someone's making $20 an hour full time, you do the math, that's 70. Our students realize it doesn't make sense, and people also realize that they're getting less for what they're paying. And God forbid you've had an eviction or even just a filing, because oftentimes people will have an eviction filed, but it won't be a judgment. Someone has initiated, they started it.
You're using a lot of words quickly.
So sometimes, I'm so sorry, I'll slow down my lawyer. So sometimes, someone will be behind.
Do you know how to do that?
No, I don't, but I'm going to do my best. Sometimes, you will be behind in rent, and a landlord will start the proceeding So that's what I mean by filing, sort of starting the proceeding. But maybe you're able to settle it, right? You can get that money, no problem, you work it out. That still shows up on court records. And oftentimes when you're looking for your next apartment or even an employment, someone can hire, an employer or a future landlord can pay a corporation to sort of look at your records. And they sometimes pull the court data that isn't a judgment. It isn't the eviction stamp. It was the starting of something that got settled. And that, can then cause you to have the next apartment that you live in, the conditions are even worse. And I think it's really interesting in court when we see these really high rents and we look at the pictures of the apartment and you're like, the students look at the pictures and they look at how much the person's paying for rent. And they're like, what is going on here? I mean, ceilings falling in, rodents, roaches, water, plumbing not working. This is not a discrete thing that's only happening to a small number of folks in our cities and towns. It's all over. And again, I think it's interesting working with our students because our students come to us. Our students have found themselves being evicted, and they've tried to do everything right. And it's really interesting with conditions because unlike the fairly, and I'm sure people might disagree, the fairly simple process to evict someone, it's very hard to assert your rights if you're a tenant. I mean, if anyone's listening to this and you've been in a rental where something breaks, sometimes you have landlords who fix things immediately and sometimes you don't. It's hard for a tenant to assert themselves and to complain because what's going to happen when you complain? Is your landlord going to love you? No, and if it's fairly easy to say, you know what, you've sort of become a headache of mine, we're in a month to month. And that's, you asked earlier, typical renters in Rhode Island. The typical renters we work with in court, they're on a month to month. They're not on a lease that they sign. It's not a formal lease with all these sections. It's just a casual arrangement. So if you speak up and you say, you know what, you got to fix that stove or you've got to fix the floorboard that's loose, you might find that your landlord said, you know what, I could probably up the rent and I don't need this headache. So that, I mean, sure, I went off on a tangent on that one, but
yeah, I would say, I mean, you pointed out before in our fact book, 1 out of 3 Rhode Islanders are cost burdened or spending more than a third of their income on their housing costs, whether it's rental or home ownership. So in a small state like Rhode Island, that means either you are the one of that 3, or somebody within your network, somebody that you work with, somebody that you employ, somebody who goes to your church, somebody who bagged your groceries, somebody who watches your kid at childcare or takes care of your grandparents at an assisted living facility is that number as well. So, to me, it's not only improving health and educational outcomes of people who are directly impacted by it, but it's also an economic growth and development. It's a workforce retention issue. It's a workforce attraction issue as well. And that means that we're all impacted by it. And more importantly, we all have to be part of the solution.
I know we all live in our little bubbles, but I do not know many people who aren't struggling right now. And I don't mean that they're actively being evicted,
right.
and I know that there's a lot of sort of like joking around about the price of eggs right now, but people are really struggling. And it's not just like people who work for minimum wage. I'm sure those people are also struggling, but like everybody at this table works at a nonprofit, and people who work in, medical situation, like at a hospital, they also work in a nonprofit. Like people are really struggling. And so I have a lot of empathy on the housing issue, and it is impacting maybe not the people that you think it is. It's really impacting everybody.
So let's close this out by asking you both. Let's look into a crystal ball. 2030. What do you think the housing market will look like then?
I'm looking at Brenda because she's all things housing. I have a wish list, but I don't. She's got reality.
I got reality check. Well, first of all, there is a 2030 housing plan that is out for public comment that the state has issued. I'll leave out the word finally, but and so there are, and looking at creating housing goals and housing production goals for each community as well. We've had an act on the book called the Low Mod Housing Act for a long time in Rhode Island. Massachusetts has a similar law. It's called Chapter 40B, which requires every community to work towards a 10% goal of their housing stock as affordable. Want to guess how many of Rhode Island's 39 communities actually meet that goal?
4.
Somebody has read the fact book. So that's a failing grade in my view. And so we've got a long ways to go, right? And trying to get all communities to have a stock of housing that's affordable and affordable over the long term. Because the housing and the real estate market fluctuate, right? Prices go up, prices go down. There's lots of things in the market that we can't control, like a COVID meltdown and large unemployment numbers, like in 2008, a post a grand recession that had huge impacts on the real estate market. There's so many factors that we can't control in the local real estate market that we need to be able to respond to. So this fair share law and the goals in the state housing plan are trying to have every community find the ways to and find the places in their community where growth makes sense. So I'm going to be very optimistic and hope that all communities say, yes, you're right. We need to be doing this, and we need places for our seniors to downsize to. We need places for starter homes and starter rental markets in order for our communities to thrive, and that they will open their doors, literally, to growth and development where it makes sense in their communities.
Well, thank you both very, very much for joining us today. We will be linking to some of the great resources that you've provided.
But before we leave, it is a tradition here that we ask you a non-serious, non-legal question. So today's question
I'm not going to be able
is...
to answer that. I can only answer in legalese.
You can find a twist, I'm sure.
What is your favorite restaurant tucked away in a town or city in Rhode Island that many people might not know about?
I have a few, but I'm going to say El Tapatio in North Kingstown, which I thought there was only one, but the family owns 4. So that's our go-to for takeout on Fridays.
I don't think it's not well known, but it's one of my favorites for sure. Wright's Farm in the northern part of the state, a traditional chicken and shells and salad dinner that gets served out to you in less than 5 minutes once you sit down. So.
Have you been there?
No, I've not.
Oh, it's
Is it good?
I've only been there once.
Oh man, we need to have a podcast, like a live, like in my dreams. Go with me on this one. In my dreams, we are doing this podcast in front of French fries and shells and salad
And pie.
and pie.
I was
best,
like,
yes,
best chicken ever.
I have 2. I have an East Bay and a West Bay. On the East Bay, there is a Japanese restaurant called Yamafuji 2 in Riverside. Now, I don't know why it's called Yamafuji 2. I don't know where the first one is, but it is a small family place, and the family is always there. The son is who waits on you and answers the phone, and they're like the loveliest people, and the food is so delicious, and they're so sensitive to allergies. And then my West Bay one is Batola in Cranston, which is a pizza place. And for 2 reasons. One is that they change their desserts out, but they have this like little homemade ring ding, which is like so good. But second, you can nominate someone to who you believe is worthy of winning free pizza for a year. And again, we're just putting things out in the universe. It is my dream to win free pizza for a year. And that, like, I don't know, once a week I go to Batola, I eat the pepperoni pizza with the hot honey, and I have a little ring ding. That's my dream when I'm not at Wright's Chicken. Do you have a favorite?
So I would probably say Roberto's on Hope Street in Bristol, Rhode Island. Of course, we work there, but Roberto's is this little Italian family-owned restaurant that just has some really, really great Italian food.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm hungry. Yeah, I'm hungry now.
Yes, we need to end our podcast because it's dinner time.
Yes. So we want to thank our listeners for tuning in for the Law 401 Legal Issues Decoded podcast. We really ask you to share this out with your friends if you've enjoyed it, to like this wherever you're listening to the podcast. And if you're interested in suggesting new episodes for us to air or hosts or guests.
Yes, if you don't like us and you would like to replace us, please send us an email and let us know.
And you'll find the information in the show notes for how to contact us.
I listen to a lot of podcasts. We're also supposed to tell people to review us. So if you are so moved, can you please review us wherever you listen to this podcast? But thank you both for being our guests. And I think that one of the things we talked about is how housing, the issues are so pervasive that this is not the last time that we will talk about housing. So hopefully,
Well, I'll talk about housing whether I'm invited to or not. So if you invite me back, I'll be happy to come.
Well, thank you both so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Law 401 Legal Issues Decoded podcast from Roger Williams University School of Law. We'd like to thank our guests on today's show. The Law 401 podcast wouldn't be possible without the generous funding from the Hassenfeld Family Foundation. We'd also like to thank our executive producer from RWU Law, Helga Melgar, the RWU Marketing and Communications team, and our production partners, Focus Forward Media and the Half Street Group. The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Roger Williams University or our partners. For more Law 401 episodes and updates, visit law.rwu.edu, YouTube, or follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts.